Hi, welcome to Stravinsky and Cubism. I'm Bob Weller, and today I'd like to discuss the relationship between jazz piano and Cubism. How are they related? Well, it's easy to make a connection because practically every art form has borrowed concepts from Cubism in the 20th and 21st century. I'm talking visual art, drama, dance, cinema, literature, poetry, music have all borrowed from Cubism. The ideas which originated in Paris in the early 1900s have permeated all artistic forms to the point where those ideas have become part of common practice. Cubism was a response to developments in physics and mathematics which pointed to higher, unseen dimensions of reality. The development of Cubism corresponds to a paradigm shift in physics from the hard materialism of Descartes and Newton to a softer form of materialism which admitted the existence of unseen forces. For an in-depth look at Cubism, I would recommend my previous videos on Stravinsky and Cubism, number 1 through 5, available on YouTube. Today I'd like to talk about two Cubist practices which affect our present-day conceptualization of jazz harmony. These practices are abstraction and simultaneity. Abstraction is probably the biggest single trend in art in the 20th century. It will become clear that we have come to accept a great deal of abstraction without giving it much thought. In the case of simultaneity or simultaneous perspectives, it becomes clear that we've embraced this concept without really knowing the origin. Let's talk about chord symbols. I'd like to take Chick Corea's advice to heart when it comes to the notation of chord symbols. He advocates a bare bones approach. In other words, he doesn't feel there's a need to spell out all the upper extensions of any given chord, since experienced jazz pianists know they can use extensions freely in chord voicings. So let's look at C minor 7. So let's talk about C minor 7. There it is in root position. Interestingly, most jazz pianists will not ever use this because it's a little too low and it's kind of dark sounding. And we probably wouldn't use this one either, just because there's more interesting stuff available. Let's start with this one up here, and we'll do that in open position. So this is kind of an abstraction. And then, of course, we can freely add things like the ninth, for example. We can add other extensions. We can add the 13th. We can play it in fourths. We can move the fourths stepwise. We can move them in minor thirds. By the way, this is the so-called So What voicing from that tune So What. So we can move them in minor thirds. We can play them in seconds. We can play rootless voicings, which is what I'm going to be doing on this demonstration, since it'll make it easier for me to play the upper extensions if I don't have to worry about the root and the fifth all the time. We can use the concept of simultaneity also, which is borrowing notes from parallel keys. In other words, we're basically in C Dorian here, which is what we use on minor chords in jazz. We use the natural 6 because it's consonant with the rest of the chord, as the flat 6 is not. So we traditionally use Dorian for minor chords. I'm going to borrow notes from other keys. For example, I'll borrow something from C major, so we get like a major 7th. Or we could borrow, say, a sharp 11 from C Lydian. It's a little easier to hear up here. And these are not necessarily chords that you're going to play at a bar mitzvah or wedding, obviously. These are going to be a little more sophisticated crowd, but that's what I'm going for here. There's other ways we can treat this. We can, for example, borrow some notes from Phrygian, so we get like a... And that's another thing we can do, clusters. We can do fourths, but in contrary motion, like that. That's another McCoy thing. And we can do, all kinds of chromatic movement. If I was playing a line like McCoy might do this, he would be playing something like borrow something from E flat minor there, or even from B minor pentatonic. In other words, a kind of what they call planing, which is where you take a little motive and you move it through different keys, something that McCoy did all the time. So let's, I'm just going to play some stuff over C minor. I'll be borrowing notes from other keys and trying to abstract this C minor as much as I possibly can. So here goes. Okay, so let's take a look at Stella by Starlight. I'm going to go over this in slow motion. I'm going to be adding some extensions which are a little bit more abstract than we're used to hearing, but nothing that hasn't been done before. So I'll play through these in slow motion. You can see what we're going to do. So now I'm going to do it in time and try to just improvise a little bit on it and abstract it a little bit more, relying on the idea of abstraction and also simultaneity, borrowing notes from other keys. For example, there was an A flat 7, and I might play it like this, which is pretty exotic. That has the natural 9 and the flat 9 in it, but I like the sound. And then the B flat major 7, I often play with a +5 in it. So that's a nice sound too. Not necessarily appropriate for a wedding or bar mitzvah, but I like them anyway. So let's see another one. Oh yeah, like for F minor to B flat, I like this sort of clustered sound. We could even move it down a step. That's a cool thing to do. And then E flat. Etc. And then, yeah, some of the minor chords I'll change to like something more exotic like this. That's with a sharp 11 and a major 7. So let me just see if I can grab a few of these in tempo. Here we go. Okay. And again, you know, I'm just grabbing stuff at random. They're just part of my standard way of playing this tune or playing any jazz tune. I'd like to add a few things that are a little more colorful than just the standard jazz harmony. 4 examples of added notes borrowed from distant keys and simultaneity and abstraction. Check out McCoy Tyner, Thelonious Monk, Herbie Hancock, and Mark Copeland in particular. I studied with Mark Copeland in New York, and he's the one that convinced me it was okay to play these things because I was hearing them, and so does he. But if you haven't checked out Mark Copeland, I definitely would check it out because it's really worth your while. Other cubist practices have affected jazz and jazz piano. There's a cubist practice called collage, which we see in Bitch's Brew by Miles Davis and Ascension by John Coltrane. And there's the pejorative term primitivism, which is a part of cubist practice, which in early jazz, particularly the heavy beat and the syncopation that was famous for corrupting teenagers since the 1920s. But it becomes clear after a point that we've really accepted a lot of practices associated with Cubism without really understanding the original theoretical underpinnings of the movement. All these ideas were rarely seen before 1900, but they've become part of common practice in all the arts. Cubism was the first truly abstract art movement, and the legacy has continued until the present day. Thank you.